Hello friends, I'm Colonel Failure, and in this brief introduction to map editing, I'm going to show you the way that I've set up my map for the first series I'm doing in Transport Fever 2. So here's a screen that looks somewhat familiar. It is very similar to that if you were creating a standard generated map, but we're not going to do that. You can head into custom settings before you get started in order to enable different mods. I've got everything switched on other than the no costs, and obviously I'm only using Urban Games' official mods for the time being. You can then set your different climate options. You can't mix climates, although you can do that by painting the landscape. The town names, I'm going to replace those anyway, but again, you've got a whole slew of different countries that you can choose town names from. When selecting options, climate will affect the skybox and the general lighting settings for the game, whereas environment will affect the tile set that is used. I guess it's a tile set, the brush set that is used to paint the landscape. The seed doesn't really matter at this point because we're going to be fiddling with that anyway. Once you're happy with your settings, hit start. When you load up into the editor, you are confronted by this completely green map. Now that might actually take your fancy, but I think we can be a bit more complex than that. So we head into the Heightmap settings here, and it will immediately generate a map for you, using the seed that was provided on the opening screen. Now you can refresh the seed as many times as you like, and it will create a new map every single time. It won't actually paint the map for you until you are happy with the result. If you prefer, you can import a height map that you've already created. For example, here's one that might look a little familiar. It's stretched on the screen here because this is a square height map, but it will still render, it might just look a little funky. Since this is my first series of the game, however, I'm going to use a generated map. I'm going to use my own name as a seed. And let's see what we come up with. I want a lot of water on my map because I want a good excuse to be able to use both planes and ships with abandon. If you want your map to be slightly more challenging, increasing the hilliness will make it far more difficult for you to plan out a network. Similarly, operating on a lot of islands can make things slightly more challenging. When you're happy with what you've got on the preview screen here, hit the generate button and wait for the magic to happen. Depending on the speed of your computer, it'll take a minute or two for the whole map to render out, but as you can see, it's drawing it in the background, and it already looks quite good fun. If you feel that way inclined, you can easily export your map to be a height map so that others can import it without having to mess around with settings. For adding towns and industries to your map, there are two ways you can go. First off, you can automatically generate them. It will default to having 2 towns on the map, which might make for quite a limited playthrough, but you can scroll that all the way up to 51. I don't think there's actually 51 there because it is going to struggle to get exactly the right number of cities placed for you. But you could, somewhere in the middle is probably about right. Again, you can use the seeding options to change the placement of those cities. You can then do the same with the number of industries that you've got. Anywhere from 2 all the way up to 200 industries on the map. Now, there is another way that you can go about this. Rather than having the game generate the industries for you and the towns for you, you can place them yourself. Because the placement of industries makes for a slightly more varied game, I'm going to keep that as random and generate them now. When it comes to towns, however, I'm going to place those manually. As you can see, you've got both town and industry buttons down at the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to start placing some towns. With those towns, you can choose which commercial good they would like and which industrial freight they have a preference for. You can also decide the size of the town. When you're ready to place, just click. So here's our first town placed on the map. I've gone for a large one, and I actually want it to have a couple of suburbs as well. So using the smaller town setting, I will now add those to the original town. The main thing to bear in mind while placing cities, however, is the more you place on the map, the earlier in the life of your game that it will start to slow down. Before finishing off this map and getting it good to go, a couple more tools to show you. The terrain tools are back once again, but they have been improved. There are 2 new brushes for you to consider. The first of which is the Heightmap texture tool. This will then give you a choice of various different hills and noise types that you can apply to whatever terrain you like. So desert noise, for example, applied to this new lump that I've created, and it will gently texture the side of the hill. The second tool you have to play with is the flatten tool. This is different to the smoothing tool, which gently eases out the terrain as you move your brush over it. With the flatten tool, it will take the center point of the mouse cursor and then move everything around it to be exactly that level. If you never want to see too much slope again, this may be the tool for you. The final thing to do in order to be ready to play the game is to create the main connections. You don't need the Heightmap tool up for this, but I like to do it anyway because it shows you where they're going to be drawn. So you hit the main connections button, it will show you where those main connections are going to be, and it will then generate them for you. So there we go, we're all set and ready to play. I'll be playing this map in my first series, so if you want to see how it turns out, why not subscribe now to make sure you don't miss out on it. Thanks for watching. Cheerio!